May I invite Dr. Sunita, Reddy, Stanley, Johny. Sarah is already here onto the stage. Some conversations demand attention, not because they are easy, but because they are necessary. Today's panel, Prioritizing Palestine, engages with a region and a history that continue to shape global politics, journalism, publishing, and public conscience, reminding us of the role literature and reportage play in documenting lives often reduced to headlines. We are joined today by Sarah Jia, Senior Commissioning Editor at Penguin Select, Penguin Random House, India. As a publisher, she's been drawn to stories that bridge distance and foreground shared humanity. At HLF, she represents Letters from Gaza, a 2025 collection by Muhammad Al-Zakkouk and Muhammad Al-Sher. Also with us is Stanley Johny, International Affairs Editor at The Hindu, a scholar of West Asian studies and an experienced journalist. His work, including Original Sin, Israel, Palestine, and the Revenge of Old West Asia, brings historical depth and analytical clarity to one of the world's most enduring conflicts. This conversation will be moderated by Dr. Sunita Reddy, whose work spans literature, media, education, and social engagement, and who also serves on the core committee of the Hyderabad Literary Festival. Over to you, Sunita.
Thank you, Naina. The book written by Stanley Johny, The Original Sin, and the one written by published by Sarah Zia, they both explore the same subject, but in completely different genres. The one written by Stanley is a work which has been meticulously researched. It's a meticulously researched account of the conflict in West Asia through his interviews and his many visits to that area. And he also delves deep into history and brings out the complex reasons behind this war, which many people have a very surface idea, peripheral idea of what is happening there. So he delves deep into history. Now, Sarah Zia, on the other hand, has published this book, which is a very powerful collection of poems, short snippets, stories, and reflections of people living in that, on ground zero in Gaza, having gone through a lot of suffering, the last unimaginable suffering. So this is their, in their own voice. So now first coming to you, Stanley. In the last 2 years, more than 2 years, the world has watched while people in Gaza went through this unimaginable tragedy, and it's still not over, I can say. Now, if you begin a conversation with someone on this topic, however sympathetic they may be to the Gaza cause, inevitably it begins with, but Hamas, that tone, which implies that they shouldn't have started it in the first place. And that is why when I read the title of your book, I was attracted to it, because I wanted to know, someone to tell the world that October 7th was not the starting point. It didn't emerge from a vacuum. There is a history behind it. So, can you tell us the history behind this? How did it start? This whole antagonism towards the Jews, the persecution of the Jews, and their clamor for a state, and how it ended up in Palestine. Yes.
Thanks, Sunita. And thanks to the HLF committee for taking up this topic as well as bringing us here to talk about Palestine, which is a very, very interesting and very important topic. And I mean, it's a long history. I take a course on West Asia. But the fundamental point is, like Sunita mentioned, which is what exactly I have written in the book. History didn't begin on October 7, 2023. I mean, I'm saying this by condemning the attack. I condemn the attack, what happened on October 7, without thinking twice. What happened on October 7 was terrible. But at the same time, it didn't begin on October 7. There is a long story of Palestinian persecution. There is an unaddressed question, Palestinian question. Palestinian people still don't have a state. And this has been promised for quite some time. I mean, you can go back to UN Security Council resolutions, UN General Assembly resolutions, etc., etc. And many people today say that there was no such thing as Palestine. I myself, I come to, I encounter a lot of arguments like, there was no such thing as Palestine, everything is Israel. And my humble request is that all you have to do is to go and read Balfour Declaration of 1917. So in Balfour Declaration was actually issued by the British government. At that time, Britain was not even the colonial masters of Palestine. And the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, 1917 November, saying that His Majesty's government supports the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. This is the language. And then you can check about the League of Nations mandate for the British. When Palestine became a British colony, and the League of Nations mandate also reads that the Great Britain will have the mandate to administer Palestine.
Yes.
So, what we call the land between the river and the sea. And this is what historical Palestine was. And it is called Palestine, and this was part of the Ottoman Empire. And it was part of the Syria Vilayat of the Ottoman Empire. And then, it would become a British colony. Like many other, we were a British colony. There is a long history of colonization. And as part of colonization and decolonization, a lot of countries, especially in the Third World and Global South, emerged independent republics in the post-Second World War era. But the tragedy of the Palestine is that Palestine never reached that point, because they first became a British colony. And then there was also this Jewish migration starting late 19th century, because the Jews were fleeing persecution in Europe. We have to admit that. They were fleeing systemic persecution in Europe. And then by the end of the Second World War, you had 35% of the population in Palestine were Jews, and they wanted their homeland. And in 1948, they will create their homeland, which is what came to know as Israel.
Sorry.
Yeah, these are the major flashpoints in history.
Before we move on to 1948, just a quick word about during the Balfour Declaration. So there are very conflicting agreements that these two colonial powers, Britain and France, they played some very, geopolitical games, dirty games, because they promised the Jews something, they promised the Palestinians something, and then between themselves they had an agreement. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, there were three agreements. Balfour Declaration was issued in 1917, in which the British promised to the Jews that they will support the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And then the British were also sending letters to the Arabs. It's called the Sharif Hussain-McMahon correspondence. So McMahon is the same McMahon who drew the line here in the East, the British diplomat, who sent the repeated letters to Sharif Hussain. Sharif Hussain was the ruler of Mecca and Medina at that time, of Hejaz. And the promise the British made was that if you rise against the Ottomans, we will support Arab independence. This was the promise, and it's written by Sir McMahon. So the British were making one promise to the Jews, and they were making another promise to the Arabs, because they wanted the support of both international Jewry as well as the local Arab population in the region for their war efforts. And then what the British actually did was to reach the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The British and the French, the Russians were on the margins, and the spirit of the Sykes-Picot Agreement was that once the war is over, the British and the French will divide up the Middle East among themselves. And that's what they did. In a sense, you look at West Asia, what happened. The British, Palestine would become a British colony. They would give something to the Hashemite family, Sharif Hussain. That's why you have the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan today, because it was non-existent at that point of time. And then the French will take over Syria, the French will take over Lebanon, and Iraq will go to the British sphere of influence. So they practically divided the region between themselves.
Terrible. Yeah, so that is just one point of the origin of this conflict. But Sarah, meanwhile, can you tell us a little bit about how this book came to be? This is a very, very unique kind of book, and it must have been a unique experience for you as well. So.
Yes, so am I audible?
Yeah, closer.
So this is, I think, this was November 2023, and it had been almost a month of, I think it was the first time we were watching a genocide happening live. Like we were watching a genocide being streamed on our phones. And that was a surreal experience for everyone, to wake up to images and videos that didn't seem to belong anywhere in place of humanity. Yet we were waking up to them, sleeping to them, with a lot of conversation happening about why this is happening. Or is it okay to happen? Is it not okay to happen? How did we land in this position? What is the history? How do we condemn it? It was so, are we allowed to condemn it? And in the midst of it, it seemed like everybody has an opinion about what these group of people or these millions of people in Gaza should be going through, should be feeling, or are feeling. Is it atrocious? Is it not? At the same time, there was so much noise about Gaza, but not a word from the people of Gaza. We were not hearing directly from them. We were not hearing their own voice. And the idea was to find a way to hear the emotions that ring out loud when the cameras have shut down, when there is no reportage. How do they, when there is just silence around them? And I was just curious if people are documenting this experience, because we thought we had seen the worst of it at the end of World War II. So I reached out to a dear friend in Morocco who runs a beautiful magazine focusing on writings from Palestinian authors and researchers. And she connected me with Muhammad Zagzouk and Mahmoud al-Shair. And when I wrote to them, I said, I don't want to hear, I'm sorry to say that, but we all have an opinion on the geopolitical scenario of it, and there is so much being said. I just want to hear from you. And they said, we just want to speak to the people. Because this book may be the last we ever get to say anything. It may be the last time our words will ever reach the world outside. And that happened. 4 of our contributors passed away during the process of publishing. And this book carries their last posthumous writings. So our entire endeavor was to take it out in real time. They were writing on ground, and I remember 2 weeks into them putting together these writings, one of their office buildings was bombarded upon and it collapsed. And they were writing from tents on their phones. So there are 30 contributors who have been writing from across the Gaza Strip. They would finish their writings, send them across to us. I was working with 30 translators dispersed around the world, and we were simultaneously translating their works to get it out in real time. And that's how Letters from Gaza came to be.
That is so, so terribly tragic. Yes, Stanley, so Palestine, I guess not many people know this, but Palestine was not the only choice when it came to finding a place for the Jews. The other 2 options were Uganda and Argentina. What do you think swayed the decision in favor of Palestine? I mean, it was such a, surrounded by Arabs. Why did they have to pick that? Was it because it was the promised land as said in the Bible? Now, in a modern pluralistic society, can we take a religious narrative and displace people who are already living there? I mean, they have their human rights, their political rights. Can a biblical narrative override all these things?
No, the simple, straightforward answer is no. Because usually the justification what we usually hear from those who support whatever Israel is doing in this region is that this was promised land to Israel. This was promised by God, so that Israel has a religious connect with the land. And it's interesting that you mentioned about the Uganda plan and the Argentina plan. So yes, fleeing persecution in Europe, Jews had migrated to Argentina. And they were, in the 19th century, they were even considering in settling down in Argentina. But the local population was hostile in Argentina. And then the British government, again, in early 20th century, when David Lloyd George was the prime minister, the British government promised the Uganda plan. At that time, East Africa was British colony. So the British promised that they would help the Jews have their homeland in Africa, in Uganda. And interestingly, Theodore Herzl, who is the spiritual founder of Zionism, you can see Herzl's big portrait in the Israeli parliament, Knesset. He is also called the spiritual founder of Israel. So Theodore Herzl warmed up to the idea. Because at that time, what he wanted a homeland. He said, if the British are going to support us in having the homeland in Africa, he was open to that. And the World Zionist Congress would set up a committee, and the committee would go to Uganda to explore the possibility of having a state, Jewish state in Africa. But again, the local population was immensely hostile. The only place where immigrating Jews were welcomed was in Palestine.
How ironic is that?
Yeah.
Okay, Sarah, tell us a bit about the challenges that you have faced while editing this book. Now, these are compilations of people who are not professional writers.
Yes.
They are just, recording their everyday experience. So how difficult was that to edit?
Sunita, I think a lot of times, and that was an unlearning for me as an editor as well. When we talk about professional writing, so much of the focus is on syntax and the structure of writing, but what they had were pure raw emotions and an urgency to express. And sometimes when that is done well, it can be so much more powerful than a well-structured sentence. And there was so much of it here that we had very little work to be done. I think in many cases, I was not able to hear back from the authors when I was doing my edits. I would send them to them and I wouldn't hear back for months and weeks, and I didn't know if they were alive. So we had to move on with the book, and the focus was that we will make only those changes that are in line with the original tone and the original voice. Nothing beyond that will be intervened, and obviously keeping in line the sensitivities of the topic. I do quickly want to read out one section, if
Sure.
you let me, because we've been talking about how Palestine has come to be and the major involvement of the world powers and the communities around the world. I think it's a fitting small poem to reflect upon where Palestine is now, the role we have played, how they perceive us, and how, I think just emotionally the weight they carry and our complicity in it.
Please.
It's called Salt Lakes by Hind Judah. She's a 20-year-old writer. She was studying when the war started, and since then she's just been compiling her works and has been awarded a prize for her works as well. So, sorrow is the gift given to us by the world. We are its eternal children who never grow old. Our unique sadness comes in many forms, as if it fears leaving us bored. An explosion may hit the roof, or it can tear up the asphalt on the ground, its trees, its graveyards. It might come in the form of a blind or a Dutch shell, or prevent food from reaching us until our bellies tremble from the dreaded sound of its void. For too long, we shed tears. We cried for a long time to earn these gifts, and they came again in the shape of a tent. Dear world, in short, we are the culmination of your deep and brutal grief. We are your salt lakes.
That is so poignant.
So it just makes you wonder what we as humanity have done for them, and they are aware. In the age of social media, if their images are reading us, our spreads are reaching them. And it's like, it's a constant, and that's what they said, that we could live with this awareness that the world has moved on without us. And you will find that emotion reflected again and again in every writing.
Yes, Stanley. So, what was the situation like in Israel and Palestine, the historical Palestine, geographically and demographically, chronologically? I mean, when it was thought of in 1917, then 1948, and then subsequently.
I think when the Balfour Declaration was issued, if you look at the demography of Palestine, roughly 5% of the population were Jews.
Only 5%.
Yeah, only 5%. Early 20th century. By the end of the Second World War, this would be around 25%. And by the time the First World War broke out, 1938-39, it could be 35%. Second World War. And by the time the war was over, roughly 45%. I mean, war was over means in 1947 you have the UN resolution, the partition plan, basically the UN partition plan. UN said that 55% of historical Palestine could be allocated for a Jewish state. So at that time, Jews made up roughly 45% of the population of Palestine, and 55% were the local Arabs. So this is how it evolved over the years, from the Balfour Declaration to the time when the state of Israel was created. Yeah, even today, if you look at historical Palestine, basically, which includes the Palestinian occupied territories. So the occupied territories means the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza Strip, plus Israel proper, which is the 1967 Israel. If you look at the population, the Palestinians, Palestinian Arabs, which means Muslims and Christians, and the Jews are evenly distributed in the whole region between the river and the sea.
Yeah. So my point was that in the beginning of the century, there were hardly 5% of Jews.
That's correct.
And then slowly they started migrating. But they were given, during the UN resolution, a larger portion was accorded to the Jews than the Arabs.
That's correct. A larger portion also the arable region, the cultivable region, everything made up, was given to the Jewish state. Yeah.
Then there was this war in 1948 where they occupied even more territory.
That's correct. 22% more territory than what the UN plan had promised. So the UN plan had promised for 55% of historical Palestine, and at the end of the First War, 1949, the Jewish state was controlling 77% of Palestinian state. So I just wanted to add one quick point. So again, one of the myths we hear about Palestine is that the Palestinians never make concessions. They never make compromise. That's why they don't have a country today. I mean, this is one of the points which many people say. So in 1993, when the Palestinian Authority recognized the state of Israel, they actually recognized the state of Israel based on the 1967 border. And we should understand one thing, 1967 border is 77% of Palestine.
That's true.
So the Palestinians actually said that you keep 77%, give us the 23%. Let us have our state. They still don't have the state.
Yeah, that is the reason, that is the point of asking this question. You know, chronologically, how much land was left to the Israelis and how the Palestinian land kept shrinking each time. By the end of the 1968 war, all of Palestine was gone. Is that right?
Yeah, all of Palestine was occupied by Israel in 1967. Yeah, that's correct.
And then what about the subsequent wars after the 1968 war? There was the Yom Kippur war, and then there was, I think
Yom Kippur was basically fought between the Egyptians and the Israelis. If you look at the history, what happened was that in 1967, the Israelis will take over the whole of historical Palestine, and including East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is the holy city. And then, ever since Palestine is unoccupied, it has been under Israel's direct military occupation. So they would withdraw from Gaza in 2005, in a sense militarily. They would withdraw the military, their troops as well as the settlers from Gaza. But Gaza would remain under Israeli blockade. I mean, nothing goes in or comes out without Israel's direct approval. Because if you look at Gaza, Gaza is basically sandwiched between Israel and the Mediterranean Sea. And they have a small crossing in the south, in Rafah, which is with the Egyptians. So the Egyptians also enforced the blockade from I mean, Israelis will again tell you that we left Gaza in 2005, but Palestinians can't live in peace. So they continue to attack us. That's why we had to attack them again. The Israelis, I mean, they left Gaza, but they enforced the blockade. Gaza has never been an independent sovereign territory.
That's
Never.
the reason it's called the largest open-air
That's
jail.
correct. That's correct. It's called the world's largest open-air prison.
So, Sarah, this book was released almost, I think, a year after the war started. How was it received? How were the sales and how did people react to it? I've seen Gideon Levy's endorsement of it and I was very happy. He's one of my favorite journalists.
So it has, when it was a challenge to publish it, I wouldn't put it mildly. It was a huge challenge to publish it because we don't realize the kind of corporate restrictions, strategic corporate restrictions that are in place when you want to publish a Palestinian author or authors from who have a Palestine address. Navigating that, it is difficult to publish something, and this is a very critical challenge we faced. When you have an academic research on Palestine being published, traditional media outlets are very happy carrying that because they know that it is very difficult, not many readers are going to read it, and it's difficult to comprehend and come to a conclusion or an understanding. It needs a lot of inference. There's only a few sections that will read it. Anytime you have people's voice being endorsed, that is when you start to get resistance. So traditional media was not, internationally, was not very receptive in endorsing it on the grounds of we don't know what opinions they may hold and it might be anti-Semitic. Even if though we said there is no mention of Jews or any opinions about the Jewish state, it is just people's lived experiences. On the other hand, we received immense support and amazing feedback from the literary community, from the readers, from journalists, from schools, from professors, and internationally we've seen amazing responses from them. And the word of mouth, from what I have understood, has been great because we did sell out of our first print run, both internationally and in the Indian market, because it was a global release. So it is a book that relies on word of mouth. It is a book that needs to be passed on from readers to readers because the media is hesitant, but when they see that the sales number do support it and the bookstores support it, those are the regions it has picked up even in the news outlets. So it's just constant push and constant work to keep the word out there.
That's fantastic. I'm sure you'll do great sales here also. Okay, no discussion on the Arab-Israeli conflict can be done without the mention of Yasser Arafat. He was a towering figure in the whole conflict. Now, with the advantage of hindsight, can we say that the tacit tolerance of Hamas in the initial stages, somehow weakened the secular leadership of the PLO? I would just 1 minute like to read out this, the words of Yasser Arafat in the General Assembly. In November 1974, while speaking at the UN General Assembly, Arafat said that the PLO wanted to establish one democratic Palestine state where Jews and Muslims live in justice, equality, and fraternity. He offered both war and peace. I have come bearing an olive branch and a freedom fighter's gun. Do not let the olive branch fall from my hands, he said. So they let it fall.
They burned it, the olive branch. It's gone. I mean, when we talk about Hamas, again, Israelis will say that we don't have peace with Palestinians because of Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist entity. That's why we don't have peace. Hamas was established only in 1987. There was no Hamas. PLO was driving the Palestinian national movement. The PLO, they were like any other third world guerrilla movement. They had used violence against Israeli forces, but the PLO was generally secular. It's a modern guerrilla force, like which you would find in any other third world countries. So Hamas emerged in 1987, and when Hamas was founded, nobody paid much attention to Hamas. Hamas was basically on the margins of the Palestinian movement, and they were founded in Gaza, because in the Islamic University in Gaza, Hamas leaders would establish the university, and that was their main hub of Hamas. See, Hamas would find a voice among the Palestinians only after the collapse of the Oslo process. Yes. So as I said earlier, Oslo Oslo at that time was seen as a major breakthrough, right? Because the Palestinians recognized Israel, Israel recognized the PLO as the Palestinian national representative, and the Israelis also promised that you would first have self-rule, and then eventually you will have the two-state solution. This was the promise of Oslo. But Hamas opposed Oslo. Hamas said Oslo was a compromise because the PLO came down from 100%, like the passage you read out, in which Yasser Arafat was saying that we wanted to liberate the whole of Palestine. And from then, in 1993, Yasser Arafat came to 23%. Give me 23%, I will have my state. This is what he said. So Hamas called it a compromise. And at that time, Yasser Arafat could still sell Oslo to his people because he said that the world is going to support us in having an independent, sovereign Palestinian state based on the two-state solution, based on the 1967 border, with East Jerusalem being our capital. This was the promise. And that promise collapsed. Oslo signed in 93 and 95. We still don't have a Palestinian state. And it was evident towards the end of the 1990s that the Palestinian state is not becoming a reality. Because the prime minister who signed Oslo was Yitzhak Rabin. Rabin signed it in 93 and 95, and in 95 he was assassinated. And Shimon Peres would take over because Peres was his foreign minister, and Peres wanted fresh elections, and he will go to elections. Peres thought that the Israelis would appreciate his efforts for peace. He thought peace will have a political dividend. And you know who came to power in 1996?
Netanyahu.
It's Benjamin Netanyahu. So Oslo was buried.
Yeah, since you mentioned Oslo, see, Oslo, I think, teaches us a lesson that, there's nothing in this world which cannot be sorted out sitting across a table. Can you tell us a little about the drama which happened behind the signing of the Oslo Accord?
Sorry, the drama?
The drama which happened behind, it was the story which happened behind the signing of the Oslo Accord. There was this couple who, the diplomat and her husband, who brought about, the leaders from both. This was done somewhere in Amsterdam.
Okay.
And all this happened behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And then the official document, of course, was signed in front of Bill Clinton by both Yasser Arafat and Peres. Of course, it collapsed because he was assassinated.
No, negotiations were going on from early 1990s onwards. Yes. In 1991, there was this Madrid round of conversation. This was the first time the PLO sent a delegation to attend an international conference. So the PLO at that time was invited, they were basically invited because they were not part of the proper delegation, because the Israelis, even then, the Israelis were saying that they will never hold negotiations with the terrorists, because the PLO, according to the Israelis, were murderous anti-Semites. This is what the Israelis call them, like what they call Hamas today. But, the contact started in 1991, and then Scandinavian countries would step in, and then they would offer a platform for negotiations. And there were a series of, backroom channel negotiations going on between the PLO and the Israelis. And what the PLO thought was that, the world was changing. The Soviet Union was gone. The United States became the only superpower. This is a new unipolar world. And Israel is the United States' closest ally in the region in West Asia. So the PLO came under a lot of pressure. And they also made a grave mistake during the Gulf War. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, Yasser Arafat went and embraced Saddam Hussein. That resulted in basically Arafat and his team losing support among the Arab countries. So the PLO basically felt the heat, So that is also the reason that they agreed for the compromise, the concession. So yes, so the negotiations started in 1991, and then multiple channels of communications were going on. And one of the draft documents they used was this framework for peace agreement. This was signed in 1978 as part of the Camp David agreement, in which the Israelis, for the first time, Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, he said that he would respect self-rule in the Palestinian territories. So they used that agreement basically as a framework to reach the Oslo agreement. So then the final agreement was, of course, signed in the United States. There were two Oslo agreements. The first agreement was signed in the US. The second agreement was signed, I think, in Egypt in 1995. So the promise of Oslo was that initially the Palestinian Authority would be created and then the Palestinians will have their own national assembly. But the West Bank would be divided into 3 areas, Area A, B and C. The Palestinians will have limited self-governing authority in Area A. In Area B, the Israelis and the Palestinians will continue to run it jointly. And Area C, which makes up 60% of the West Bank, will be under the direct control of the Israelis.
Israel.
And it is still under the Israeli control.
Yeah, Sarah, so I went through the entire book and while I found the entire book extremely poignant, heart-wrenching, and makes you weep in many parts. There was one story which I particularly liked, which was particularly moving. It's called A Scarf. So do you have any personal favorite, any piece of writing you want to read out?
As Stanley was recounting the whole Oslo Agreement and everything that goes behind it and the world powers at play, I have this one story from Ahmad Murtaza. He was born in 1996. And because it was signed in 1991, and all the change of hands and the discussions, I just want to read out a few lines from his contribution to the book, because I think it gives such perspective on while these huge decisions are being made about the lives of the people there, what are they going through? Has their life truly been changed through all of these different agreements and accords and transactions? So he writes, "Hello, this is Ahmed from Gaza. The thing I fear most is that my name will become a breaking news story, saying, for example, X number of victims were recovered during heavy shelling on X area, and I would become a dull number in the midst of all the countless numbers that haven't ceased until this moment. The thing I fear most is that everything will come to seem like normal events, and that it will become normal to bomb a house, and the normal thing would just not be giving a warning in advance. It will become normal for a child to die, whereas the normal thing would be that he died screaming, as well as many other things that can't be covered in a single text. A couple of days ago, I was pondering the question, what's the difference between escalation and war? And I wondered at the time what the significance of the question was, as long as the outcome was the same, a mother crying, a child screaming. That is, if they get a chance to cry or scream. I am Ahmed, and I'm afraid that I'll die and become an insignificant number, and that everything will be gone before I complete the text." So I think that is what we forget at times, right? That these are not mere numbers and territories and annexure A and B and C's and blockade points. These are real peoples who had hopes and lives and possible outcomes and stories to write. But the only question they face when they wake up in the morning is if they'll die or if they'll escape that death till tomorrow. And if that is even a way of living. And what is the point of all these world leaders coming on in a conference room when a child has to wake up with these thoughts?
Yeah, Stanley, so your book repeats moments where diplomacy could have been possible. Several places, maybe not several, but a few. Which abandoned opportunity, now in hindsight, which abandoned opportunity do you believe haunts the present the most? I mean, if they had done that, this wouldn't have happened, kind of thing.
See, I think the moment the Israelis and the Palestinians basically reached the closest point to an agreement was Oslo.
Okay.
The Palestinians made a huge concession to reach there. The Israelis didn't make any concession. We should understand that. The Palestinians, they said that until 1990s, they said that they wanted to liberate the whole of Palestine, but they accepted that Israel is a reality, political reality. They were ready to recognize Israel in 77% of historical Palestine, hoping that the international community would back them in having their own state. So Oslo actually presented an opportunity to the world, as well as to the Israelis and the Palestinians, to have the two-state solution. So two-state means you will have the Israeli state, which will be a much more powerful, militarized, much more powerful state, and a Palestinian state that divided in two territories, West Bank and Gaza. West Bank is on the western bank of the Jordan River, Gaza is on the Mediterranean coast. But the Palestinians also wanted East Jerusalem because Israel has been controlling West Jerusalem from 1948 onwards. So the Palestinians say at least East Jerusalem should be part of their capital. So Oslo at least presented an opportunity. But I mean, if you ask me today, that Oslo moment is gone. When I am increasingly skeptical of even the two-state solution today. Because, I mean, you can't practically think about the two-state solution being possible today. There are a lot of problems on the ground. So that was the moment where both sides reached at least the possibility of a compromise, but now that's gone.
Yeah, so this whole blockade of Gaza, no, it turned a political problem into a humanitarian pressure cooker-like situation. So what do you think? I mean, how did the Israelis fail to detect this? I mean, who kind of encouraged them to think that this would not have consequences?
Yeah, so the Israelis thought, I mean, that's what I call it, occupation without consequences.
Yeah.
This was their policy. Because the situation in the West Bank is equally bad. The pre-October 7 situation in the West Bank. I've been to the West Bank a couple of times. The daily life in the West Bank is horrible. You can't move from one city to the other without going to the Israeli checkpoints. Settler violence is a day-to-day phenomenon. People are being driven out of their homes. They can't go back to their homes. Their house is set on fire. Their car is set on fire. Their communities are being attacked because the settlers wanted the land. So in Gaza, what the Israelis, because in the West Bank, you have some, let's say 700,000 Israeli settlers are living in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. In Gaza, settlers were withdrawn, but Gaza was kept under the tight Israeli control. In 2022, I was in Israel, and then we went to the Gaza border, and the Israeli officials told us that everything is manageable. We have this big surveillance post, we have the drones, we have the barrier, we have the underground wall, so that Hamas will not build any more tunnels into Israel. So everything is under control. What the Israelis thought that Hamas's response would be, every time there is a flare-up, Hamas would fire rockets. So Israel thought that they have the Iron Dome, they have the missile defense shield, so the threat from Hamas is manageable. So it's, or at least it's worth to pay the price of the Iron Dome to keep the Palestinians under check. This is what the Israelis thought. They didn't expect this kind of a massive Hamas retaliation. They were not ready for that. That's what caught them, I think, by surprise.
Yeah, but also was the political crisis which was happening in Israel.
Yeah.
To what extent was that responsible? Just also because of the judicial reforms which were happening?
Right. So I identify three reasons. When I look at it as an analyst, one is, of course, the situation, the pressure cooker-like situation inside Gaza, because the status quo was unbearable. You can't continue to live like that. So it was actually leading to some kind of an explosion. There were repeated, flare-ups from Gaza. There were multiple conflicts in the past few years. So that's one thing. So Hamas was preparing to do something. And then secondly, the regional situation. If you look at West Asia, before the October 7, in September 2023, the Saudi Crown Prince was in India to attend the G20 summit. And then he said that the Saudis and the Israelis were making progress on a daily basis towards normalization. The Abraham Accords were announced in 2020. The UAE normalized ties with Israel. So the Arab countries have clearly moved away from the Palestinian cause. Nobody was bothered about the Palestinians. So the Palestine issue was clearly pushed to the margins of West Asia. So the Palestinians wanted to bring it back to the fore of West Asia.
Hamas wanted.
Yeah. And the third, of course, is what you talked about, the crisis within Israel. Hamas thought this was the moment to carry out their attack because the Israeli society itself was facing, even today, Israeli society is facing a lot of internal challenges because Netanyahu wanted to rewrite the judicial control, basically. He wanted to take full control of the judiciary. There were massive protests. Israeli reservists refused to serve. So Hamas thought that the state was weak. They also wanted to move quickly because they thought otherwise the Saudis were going to normalize ties. They didn't want that to happen because that would be a massive setback for the Palestinian cause.
Yeah.
So I think if you put all these 3 points together, you have October 7.
Yeah. So I have a couple of questions, but we're running out of time, so I just will ask you the last one. Uh, do you feel hopeful that peace will ever return to Gaza? And now that Trump has come forward with his Board of Peace plan, I heard a comment by this journalist, what's his name, Mehdi Hassan. So he said, it is like giving the arsonist the job of putting out the fire.
I mean, if you look at the board members on that plan, this piece is questionable.
Yeah. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm cynical when it comes to this question. I'm sorry to say that, but I'm not hopeful. And the situation of the Palestinians is beyond our imagination. So that's one thing. And especially in the near term, I can tell you what's going to happen. Israel wants to annex West Bank. So Israel, before Trump leaves office, Israel might at least go ahead with its plan to annex the settlements, which is the Area C, roughly 60% of West Bank. They would like to do that. Netanyahu would like to do that. They might try to do that. Gaza is already divided. 55% of Gaza is now clearly under Israel's direct military occupation. And 45% as part of this Board of Peace plan, they are going to divide it into some enclaves. And BBC headline says, Gaza is going to get skyscrapers. So this is Jared Kushner and others, the plan they unveiled was that to turn half of Gaza basically into, they develop it into as a real estate property, while Israel will control 55% of Gaza. So which means if question is about, is there a possibility for a solution to the Palestinian question, or is there a possibility for the Palestinians to have a state? I don't see that. Possibility at least in the near term.
Also
No,
for the
no way of you ever publishing a happy book on Gaza.
I mean, also, we're talking about undoing generations of trauma. There are people who will never get to come back to their homelands. So what is a homeland without the people who are meant to live in there? What is peace when there is no normalization, when the homes have been destroyed and families have been ripped apart? So the idea of peace is beyond just the ending of shellings and ending of bombings. It's also a fulfilled community, which without the existence of that, is there really peace? That's a question to be thought about.
We have maybe time for one or two questions. Anyone wants to? Yeah, there.
Thank you to the speakers. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you both for your wonderful presentation. I wanted to tell you that I actually interviewed Edward Said on the only occasion that he came to India. And he said that Oslo was a disaster. It was a disaster even before it became a disaster. And he said one of the reasons was while those from Israel, completely in control of the situation, they had the maps and everything, the Palestinians were totally unprepared. And so, I mean, the outcome was clear even from day one. I don't know if any of you feel that there could have been any hope from the Oslo Accord. It seems that, Stanley, I don't know whether you felt that perhaps the two-state solution that it offered was a way out. But I think you're finally a votary of the one-state solution, I think, from what I can make out here.
I will answer quickly with one quote from John Mearsheimer, the American political scientist. He said the two-state solution was the best possible solution you could have imagined for the Palestinian state, but that bus has long passed, long time ago. So the best solution is over. So if you ask for my views, I mean, I also thought that two-state solution would have been a practical solution, but today, two-state solution, one-state solution, both look utopian to me, so that you should even start talking about perhaps a single state.
Yeah. Thank you both, Stanley and Sarah. One more? Yeah. One more question, yeah.
Yeah, can I?
Yeah.
Since the mic is with me, so I'll quickly ask a couple of questions.
We'll
First,
take two questions and you ask. Vikram also wants to ask.
right. Do you think that the international community cannot be let off for their accountability in this conflict? So your comments on that, and then this Israel and Palestine conflict has also brought a lot of neighborhood in the West Asia to be in conflict as well. So your comment on the West Asia politics and the international community accountability. Thank you.
Honestly, just from a storytelling perspective, West Asia, I think, is most accountable, the closest to it, and the lack of accountability, and that is something you will feel resonating across the stories in the book as well, is that their neighbors abandoned them, the ones who should have been the first to help. And then you move on to the international community, and then I think Stanley will obviously answer better on the complicated world order and the financial ties and everything that comes to play when something like that is happening. But yes, the accountability lies largely on West Asia, even from the Palestinian perspective.
The international community is an utter failure when it comes to the Palestine question. Utter, complete failure. Why it is a failure? Because Israel is the darling of the United States. I mean, you just witnessed a genocide. Is there any sanctions on Israel? We are still talking about sanctioning Iran. There are daily sanctions on Iran. Nobody is talking about Israel. So that's because Israel is the closest American ally, so nobody wants to touch Israel. Quickly, just make a quick comparison between Ukraine and Gaza.
Absolutely.
So everybody has imposed sanctions on Russia, and they are holding Russia accountable for what they are doing in Ukraine, which is fine. I always say that's fine. Russia has violated Ukraine's sovereignty. You can talk about it. But how many people were killed in Ukraine? Civilians. According to the UN, in the last 4 years, exactly 4 years, 10,000 people were killed in Ukraine. Civilians. That's important. 10,000 lives are very, very important. In 2 years, Israel killed 74,000 people in Gaza, of which 20,000 were children. 400,000 people were wounded. And that is roughly, 4% of Gaza's entire population. Gaza's entire population has been displaced. That's 2.3 million people. In April 2024, just 6 months into the war, an Israeli journalist told me in Jerusalem that not a single building is standing in northern Gaza because everything has been brought down to the ground. Is anybody holding Israel accountable? No.
Yeah, Vikram? Just one.
Only one question, please.
One simple question. What do you think has India abandoned the two-state theory, and has India abandoned Palestine?
India's position, I would say, India used to be a great champion of the Palestinian cause, which we are not anymore. Okay? But India, in theory, India says that it still supports the two-state solution. This is the official position. But I will tell you how it has evolved. So India used to be a great champion of the Palestinian cause, but then from 1990s onwards, India's position was that India supports the creation of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state with East Jerusalem being its capital, based on the 1967 border. We took this position until 2015. I'm saying 2015 because I accompanied President Pranab Mukherjee when he went to Palestine in 2015, where he read out this position. But from 2015 onwards, India's position is that India supports the two-state solution. That's it. No reference to the border, no reference to Jerusalem, no reference to the Palestinians. And on the other side, we have very, very cozy, close intelligence defense relationship with Israel.
Thank you so much. At HLF, we strive, to deepen our understanding about the most complex, situations and geopolitical issues. Thank you so much, panelists and moderator, and the audience.